The breaking news this hour, our CNN exclusive reporting. Sources telling CNN that U.S. intelligence officials believe spies were among the dozens of Russian diplomats expelled by the Trump administration last month. Those spies suspected of tracking Russian defectors who had resettled here in the United States. Let's get some more on this and other issues. Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky is joining us. He's a member of both the Homeland Security and Foreign Relations Committees. Senator, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
Do you believe those among those 60 Russian, quote, diplomats who were expelled, that at least some of them posed a major national security threat to the United States?
You know, I think it's unsurprising that people that are here either on embassy missions or otherwise might be spies. I think for decades we've realized that people in consulates, really on all sides of the Cold War, were doing a little bit of surveillance and gathering of information. What makes this troubling, though, is if someone would actually be targeting dissidents from that country. And so I think that is an alarming bit of news, and I think we need to figure out where the intelligence takes us. But that's very alarming and much more significant than the run-of-the-mill sort of espionage that many embassies, I think, are committing.
Yeah, a lot more alarming, especially in the aftermath of the assassination of that former Russian spy in the UK weeks ago that caused so much diplomatic ramification, expulsions, and all of that. So people are clearly very worried about all of this. I want to move on and get your thoughts on another sensitive issue. You told me last week you were opposed to President Trump's nomination of Mike Pompeo, the outgoing CIA director, to become the next Secretary of State. Let me play the clip from our interview, and then we'll discuss. Is there any chance you're going to vote to confirm Mike Pompeo as the next Secretary of State?
If he came out publicly and said he's time to declare victory and come home, but he just said last week he doesn't believe that. He thinks that we have a continued mission in Afghanistan, and I challenged him with the president's own words, saying the president said it was time to come home, and Pompeo doesn't agree with that. And that's what I actually think is really bad about his nomination, is that he will be giving advice to the president that goes against the president's good instincts that the war has run its course.
So why did you change your mind?
You know, this has been my biggest complaint about Pompeo as a nominee from the very beginning, is my concern that he did not share the president's understanding of the Middle East. I think one of the most instructive things, what should be one of the most instructive events of the last decade or two, is that the Iraq War and the regime change actually made it more chaotic, emboldened Iran, and made the situation less stable in the Middle East. So I did want to get at that. The president called me last week and said, would I meet with Pompeo personally to discuss this? I did, and I asked him the same question in private and public. And I think I got a little more complete answer when we discussed, and my question was very pointed. Do you agree with the president that the Iraq War was a mistake? And I think as we went through our discussion, as I had more discussions with the president, and then again with candidate or nominee Pompeo, I was assured, and he told me that not only privately does he believe this, that we'll be hearing from him publicly also, that regime change and the unintended consequences of our foreign policy of the last 20 years have led to chaos and instability in the Middle East, and that we need to try a new direction. Is he exactly where I am? No. And so I still wish that he was closer to where I am, but I can tell you from talking to the president 3 times in the last week that the president is very close to where I am, that we've been at war too long in too many places. He said it repeatedly about Afghanistan. He said it repeatedly about the Iraq War. And so I think the president is sincere in his belief that concern for our soldiers should lead us to not expand these wars, but to try to find answers to how we end these wars. And I do take the president's word at that. I hope President Pompeo will be giving better information to the president and not dissuading him from ending the Afghan war. And I came to believe over several discussions that candidate Pompeo will support the president in what the president decides is best for the country. And so I did make a decision, and it's always difficult to make a decision where you do change course. But I think with new information, I think in this case, I'm happy with where I wound up.
Did the president offer you anything in return for your support?
No, and I think that's very important for people to know. It's not like, the president said, hey, I'll build a bridge for you. There was nothing like that at all. He did promise, though, that he would consider the civil liberties of individuals. He would consider that the war has, run its course to many minds. Even candidate Pompeo said that there is no military solution in Afghanistan, which I think the follow-up question is, if there's no military solution, why are we sending one more soldier? That's where I am. I'm not ready to send one more soldier. I'm ready to declare victory and come home. I don't think the president's exactly there, nor is Pompeo, but there wasn't anything sort of specifically offered other than that the president said his foreign policy vision will prevail and that it is similar to my position. That did help me along the way. The only other thing we discussed was I've been very concerned that members of the FBI can search Americans' records without a search warrant. I think that goes against the spirit and the rule of law of the Fourth Amendment. And I did discuss with the president whether or not he might intervene executively to change the rules to say all FBI agents would have to get a warrant to search these foreign intelligence databases. I think that's good policy, and I am hopeful that there's no promise made, but I am hopeful that those discussions will be ongoing.
You also told me, and you're on record, as opposing the nomination of Deputy CIA Director Gina Haspel to become the new CIA Director, replacing Mike Pompeo. Is there any chance the president will convince you? Any chance you're going to change your mind? Did you discuss her nomination with the president?
No, we didn't, and I think it's very, very unlikely that I would change my mind, because I think it's a bad idea to have someone at the head of the CIA who's been an advocate for torture and an advocate for something that defies the Geneva Convention. And so, no, I think she's still a really bad choice to head the CIA, and it sends a terrible message to our enemies. You know, I've got family members in the military, and I don't want them serving with the knowledge that other countries will say, well, I guess torture is maybe not so bad because the U.S. has appointed someone to head their agency who engaged in extraordinary rendition, meaning they were secretly taken to a country that has a different view of human rights and allowed this to happen on their territory. But specifically, these prisoners were taken to another country because it's illegal to torture people in the U.S. And so that's a pretty important thing, and I think that's not the kind of person we need to lead the CIA.
Well, the president keeps saying you've never let him down, so on this particular nomination, you might wind up letting him down. We'll see what happens when the vote comes up. But let me quickly turn to Dr. Ronny Jackson, the president's physician over at the White House, the nominee to become the next Secretary of Veterans Affairs. He's under a lot of fire, as you know, for allegations of misconduct during his time as a White House physician. But misconduct allegations aside, even President Trump acknowledged yesterday that Dr. Jackson lacks experience. So the VA is one of the largest departments in the federal government. Shouldn't this position be filled by someone who has a lot more experience leading a huge organization like the Department of Veterans Affairs?
You know, these are arguments we have a lot of times in politics, whether, you know, a governor makes a better president or a senator makes a better president because of executive experience. I don't know that there is an easy black and white answer that someone's always better, because I think the policies make a difference as well. I do think that we ought to be careful in Dr. Jackson's case not to immediately assume that everything that is alleged is true. We're talking about a man's character. These are very significant allegations. And I would just caution that this is a man's life we're talking about who's an admiral who has served honorably for many years. And before we completely trash his character, someone ought to at least give the gentleman a chance to defend himself.
You make a fair point. The only question, the serious question, is if he does have the credentials, the experience to run the Department of Veterans Affairs, and you'll have an opportunity, presumably, if he continues this quest, to question him during the process. Senator, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
The breaking news continues.